The crystal chandeliers of the Waldorf Astoria trembled as laughter echoed through the ballroom. Cruel, mocking laughter aimed directly at the bride's size 22 frame. But the room went dead silent when the groom, a man who ruled the city's underworld, slowly reached into his tuxedo jacket and drew a loaded revolver. Evelyn stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirrors of the Waldorf Astoria's presidential suite, her hands trembling as they smoothed the heavy ivory silk of her custom Carolina Herrera gown. Evelyn was fat. She wasn't thick, she wasn't pleasingly plump, and she wasn't curvy in the socially acceptable hourglass way that magazines praised. She was a size 22, with soft, heavy arms, a broad stomach, and wide hips. For 30 years, her body had been a public battleground, a subject of unsolicited advice, medical warnings from relatives who didn't actually care about her health, and the cruel, unfiltered mockery of high society. And today, she was marrying Vincent Moretti. Vincent was a ghost to the IRS, a philanthropist to the mayor of New York, and a brutal, unquestioned monarch to the city's criminal underworld. He was also a man who looked like he had been carved from marble and shadow, tall, ruthlessly handsome, with eyes the color of cracked asphalt. The world could not understand how a man who could have any supermodel, any heiress, any Italian aristocrat, had chosen the quiet, heavy-set trauma nurse who had dug a 9mm bullet out of his shoulder in the underground wing of Mount Sinai Hospital 3 years ago. "Are you absolutely sure about the corset, Evelyn?" The sharp, nasal voice belonged to Evelyn's stepsister, Savannah. Savannah was a size 2, currently poured into a slinky champagne bridesmaid dress that looked more suited for a red carpet than a Catholic wedding. Savannah sipped her Dom Perignon, her eyes dragging up and down Evelyn's reflection with undisguised pity. "I mean," Savannah continued, exchanging a knowing smirk with their mother, Beatrice, who sat on a velvet chaise lounge, "it just looks so restrictive. You don't want to pass out at the altar. Sweating through silk isn't a good look, sweetie." Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing a polite smile. "It's fine, Savannah. The seamstress made sure I have plenty of room to breathe." "Well, it's certainly a lot of fabric," Beatrice chimed in, adjusting her diamond Cartier necklace. "I still say an A-line would have hidden your assets better than a fitted bodice." "We are blending families with the Morettis today, Evelyn. The wealthiest, most traditional families in New York will be in those pews. The Pendletons, the Vanderbilts. You know Arthur Pendleton's daughter, Genevieve, will be there. She dated Vincent for 2 years. She's wearing vintage Chanel today." Evelyn dropped her hands from her waist. The implication hung heavily in the room. "Genevieve is thin. Genevieve is beautiful. You are a joke." "Vincent chose me, Mother," Evelyn said, her voice quiet but firm. "Men like Vincent choose women like you for comfort, Evelyn," Beatrice said with a cruel, dismissive wave of her hand. "They marry you because you're safe, because no one else will steal you away. But don't mistake charity for passion." The words felt like a physical blow. Evelyn turned away from the mirror, her chest tight. This was supposed to be her day. But ever since the engagement ring, a flawless 6-carat Harry Winston diamond had been slipped onto her plump finger. The whispers hadn't stopped. She had heard them at the engagement party. She had seen the sideways glances from Vincent's capos. She had read the vicious anonymous comments on the society pages. The whale and the wolf. That was what the tabloids had secretly dubbed them. A sharp knock at the heavy oak door broke the suffocating tension. Before anyone could answer, the door swung open. Vincent stood in the doorway. He was dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders flawlessly. His dark hair was swept back, and his jaw was set in its usual hard line. Beside him stood his right-hand man, Leo, a scarred enforcer who looked distinctly uncomfortable in formal wear. "Vincent!" Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearls. "It's bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony." Vincent didn't even look at Beatrice. His cold, dark eyes locked onto Evelyn, and immediately the glacial hardness in his expression melted. He crossed the room, his leather dress shoes silent on the Persian rug, entirely ignoring the gasp of disapproval from Savannah. He stopped inches from Evelyn, his hands gently framing her face. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones. "You are breathing too fast," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble meant only for her. "What did they say to you?" "Nothing," Evelyn lied softly, her eyes dropping to his silk tie. "Just wedding jitters." Vincent's gaze shifted, slowly panning over to Savannah and Beatrice. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. Vincent didn't raise his voice. He never had to. "If either of you has made my bride feel anything less than a queen today, I will have you removed from this hotel and thrown into the East River. Am I understood?" Savannah's champagne flute rattled against her teeth. Beatrice went pale, nodding frantically. "Oh, of course, Vincent. We were just telling her how beautiful she looks." Vincent turned his attention back to Evelyn. He leaned in, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead. "You are the only real thing in my world, Evelyn," he whispered against her skin. "Today, you become a Moretti. Let them stare. They are looking at the woman who holds my life in her hands." He pulled back, his eyes fiercely protective. "I will see you at the altar, Mia Regina." As Vincent left the room, Evelyn looked back at the mirror. For the first time that morning, she didn't see the fat girl who didn't belong. She saw a woman who was loved by a monster, and who loved him in return. But as she would soon learn, high society and the criminal underworld shared one common trait. They rarely let a monster have a happy ending. Street. Patrick's Cathedral was a cavern of stained glass, towering Gothic arches, and suffocating tension. The guest list was a volatile cocktail of New York's elite. On the left side of the aisle sat the blue bloods, hedge fund managers, politicians, and socialites dripping in generational wealth. On the right side sat the underworld, men with thick necks, tailored suits that hid shoulder holsters, and eyes that constantly scanned the exits. The air was thick with the scent of thousands of imported white lilies, a floral arrangement that had cost more than Evelyn's childhood home. Standing in the vestibule, Evelyn gripped her cascading bouquet of white orchids so tightly her knuckles ached. The grand pipe organ began to play the opening chords of Wagner's Bridal Chorus. "Ready to do this, kid?" asked Uncle Thomas, the only relative Evelyn genuinely liked. He offered her his arm. "I'm terrified, Uncle Tommy," Evelyn whispered, her heart hammering wildly against the rigid boning of her corset. "Don't look at them," he said gently, patting her hand. "You look at him. Only him." The massive wooden doors groaned open. The cathedral stretched out before her, a sea of faces turning in unison. Evelyn took her first step down the aisle. Almost immediately, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't the awe-struck silence that usually accompanies a bride. It was a physical, heavy wave of judgment. From her vantage point, Evelyn could see the subtle nudges. She saw the wealthy wives leaning behind their silk fans to whisper to their husbands. "Look at her arms!" A woman's hiss echoed off the stone pillars. Evelyn kept her eyes locked forward. Vincent was standing at the altar, looking like a dark god waiting for his sacrifice. His eyes never left hers, grounding her. But the aisle was 100 feet long, and the venom of 200 people is impossible to ignore. As Evelyn passed the fourth row on the left, she saw Genevieve Pendleton. The statuesque, painfully thin blonde was leaning into her father, Arthur Pendleton. Genevieve didn't even bother to whisper. "It's honestly grotesque," Genevieve said, her voice cutting through the organ music like a razor. "She looks like a frosted wedding cake that was left out in the sun." A muffled snicker rippled through the pews behind Genevieve. Even a few of the mobsters on the right side of the aisle exchanged amused, disrespectful grins. To the underworld, Vincent Moretti was a god, but his choice of a heavy, unremarkable bride was seen as a sign of mental weakness. They respected his trigger finger, but in this moment, they did not respect his wife. Evelyn felt a hot flush of humiliation crawl up her neck. Her eyes welled with tears. She stumbled, her heavy satin heel catching on the edge of the velvet runner. She caught herself before she fell, but a distinct, cruel laugh echoed from the blue blood side of the cathedral. "Careful, we don't want a localized earthquake," someone muttered loudly. Evelyn froze halfway down the aisle. The crushing weight of a lifetime of bullying crashed down on her shoulders. Beatrice was right. She didn't belong here. She was playing dress-up in a world that despised her. She looked at Vincent, a single tear escaping and tracking through her carefully applied makeup. "I can't do this," her eyes pleaded with him. "I'm so sorry." Vincent's expression did not change. He did not frown. He did not yell. But the temperature in the cathedral dropped to absolute zero. He stepped down from the altar. The organist, sensing the sudden shift in the room's energy, faltered. The music sputtered and died, leaving a heavy, terrifying silence echoing through the massive stone arches. Vincent walked down the aisle toward Evelyn. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, the sound of a predator moving through the grass. He reached her, gently taking her trembling, cold hands in his warm ones. He pulled a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and tenderly wiped the tear from her cheek. "You are perfection," he whispered to her, so softly that only she could hear. "Do not let insects make you feel small." Vincent then slowly turned to face the congregation. He didn't look at the mobsters. He looked directly at the left side of the aisle, the society side, the side that believed their trust funds and Ivy League degrees made them untouchable. "Arthur," Vincent said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried effortlessly to the back of the cathedral. Arthur Pendleton stiffened in his pew, his patrician face paling slightly. "Vincent, is there a problem?" "Your daughter," Vincent said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "has a loud voice, and she lacks manners." Genevieve shrank back against her father, suddenly realizing that the man standing in the aisle wasn't a socialite groom. He was the apex predator of New York. "Now see here, Moretti," Arthur bristled, standing up, trying to project authority. "We are guests here. If my daughter made a private observation, it is none of your concern. Perhaps if you had chosen a bride, more fitting of your station." Vincent didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply reached inside his tuxedo jacket. The movement was smooth, practiced, and devastatingly fast. The heavy metallic clack of a hammer being pulled back echoed like a thunderclap in the silent church. Suddenly, the polished, heavy steel of a Colt Python revolver was resting in Vincent's hand, the barrel pointed directly at Arthur Pendleton's chest. Chaos erupted in a silent, paralyzed way. The men on the right side of the aisle, the capos and soldiers, instantly stood up, their hands slipping into their own jackets, waiting for the order. The society guests on the left gasped, some women stifling screams with their hands, men freezing in terror. Evelyn gasped, grabbing Vincent's arm. "Vincent, no!" "Everyone mocks the bride," Vincent said, his voice echoing in the dead silence, cutting over Evelyn's plea. He didn't even look at the gun in his hand. His dead, shark-like eyes were locked on Arthur. "Everyone has a joke. Everyone has an opinion about the woman I love." He took one step closer to the pews. The sheer malice radiating from him forced Arthur to stumble backward. "Let me clarify something for the politicians, the bankers, and the families in this room," Vincent continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You are not here because I value your company. You are here because I wanted witnesses. You are here to witness the coronation of your new queen." He tilted the barrel of the revolver up, aiming it directly at the space between Arthur's eyes. "The next person who breathes wrong in my wife's direction," Vincent said, "will not leave this church. I will paint the altar with your blood, and my men will bury you under the foundations of this city. Genevieve." The blonde socialite whimpered, tears streaking her expensive makeup. "Apologize to my wife," Vincent ordered. Genevieve trembled violently, looking at the gun, then at Evelyn. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Evelyn." Vincent's dark eyes swept the room, taking in the terrified faces of the society elite and the suddenly intensely respectful faces of his own mafia crew. He had drawn a line in the sand. Evelyn was not a joke. She was untouchable. Slowly, Vincent uncocked the revolver and slid it back into his jacket. The collective breath of 200 people was exhaled in a shaky rush. He turned back to Evelyn, his hard features softening instantly as he looked at her. He offered her his arm. "Shall we, Mrs. Moretti?" he asked gently. Evelyn looked at the terrified crowd, then at the man who had just brought billionaires to their knees for her. A fierce, unfamiliar heat bloomed in her chest. For the first time in her life, she didn't want to hide. She slipped her arm through his, raising her chin high. "Let's get married, Vincent," she said. They walked the rest of the way to the altar in absolute pin-drop silence. But as the priest nervously cleared his throat to begin the vows, the doors at the back of the cathedral violently blew open, shattering the stained glass in the vestibule and sending a shower of colored shards across the marble floor. Vincent instantly pushed Evelyn behind him, his hand flying back to his jacket as a voice boomed from the back of the church. "Nobody is getting married today, Moretti." Evelyn peeked around Vincent's broad shoulder, her blood running cold as she saw the heavily armed men stepping through the ruined doors. The heavy oak and stained glass doors of St. Patrick's Cathedral exploded inward. Shards of ruby, emerald, and sapphire glass rained down on the imported white lilies, glittering like deadly confetti. The music died instantly, replaced by the deafening staccato roar of automatic gunfire. "Get down!" Vincent roared, his voice cutting through the pandemonium. He didn't hesitate. With one fluid motion, he tackled Evelyn, his heavy, muscular frame shielding her as they crashed behind the solid marble steps of the high altar. Her breath left her in a sharp whoosh, the rigid boning of her corset digging into her ribs. Above them, the cathedral devolved into absolute madness. The left side of the aisle, the untouchable blue bloods, screamed in pure, unadulterated terror. Billionaires scrambled under wooden pews like rats, their custom suits tearing on splinters. Savannah, who had spent all morning mocking Evelyn's dress, was weeping hysterically, her face pressed into the dusty floor. Champagne spilled down her front. But the right side of the aisle, Vincent's men, reacted with lethal precision. Leo and a dozen capos drew their weapons, flipping heavy oak pews to create barricades. The smell of incense and white lilies was instantly overpowered by the sharp, metallic stench of cordite and copper. Evelyn gasped for air, peering around Vincent's broad shoulder. Standing in the ruined doorway, casually stepping over the rubble, was Declan Gallagher. He was the ruthless head of the West Side Irish Syndicate, a man who had spent the last 5 years trying to carve out a piece of Vincent's territory. Declan was flanked by 20 heavily armed mercenaries wearing tactical gear over cheap suits. "Thought you could have a wedding without inviting the neighbors, Vinny?" Declan yelled, his thick brogue echoing off the vaulted ceilings. He fired a burst from his Mac-10 into the ceiling, sending chunks of plaster raining down on the terrified society guests. "I'm here for a hostile takeover. Hand over the ports, Vinny, or I'll bury you and your fat cow of a bride right here." Vincent's jaw locked. His dark eyes burned with a murderous rage that Evelyn had never seen before. He pulled his Colt Python, checking the cylinder. "Stay down, Evelyn," he ordered, his voice dangerously calm. "Do not move from this spot." Before Evelyn could answer, a scream ripped through the air, a sound of genuine, agonizing pain. Evelyn whipped her head around. Just 10 feet away, pinned behind a decorative pillar, was Uncle Thomas. A stray bullet had caught him in the upper thigh, and dark, arterial blood was already pooling rapidly on the white marble floor. "Uncle Tommy!" Evelyn screamed. The trauma nurse in her instantly overrode the terrified bride. Evelyn had spent years in the underground wing of Mount Sinai, patching up gunshot wounds and stab injuries that the police were never called for. She knew what a severed femoral artery looked like. Uncle Thomas had less than 3 minutes before he bled out. "Evelyn, no!" Vincent shouted, grabbing for her wrist. But Evelyn was already moving. She ignored the gunfire cracking overhead. She ignored the danger. And most importantly, she ignored the expensive, restrictive Carolina Herrera gown. With a fierce grunt, Evelyn grabbed the thick, multi-layered silk skirt of her size 22 dress and ripped it violently upward, exposing her thick thighs and tearing away the suffocating fabric that hindered her movement. She crawled rapidly across the glass-strewn floor, her large frame moving with surprising agility and undeniable purpose. "I've got you, Uncle Tommy," Evelyn panted, sliding next to him. "Kid, it's bad," Thomas wheezed, his face rapidly losing color. "I've seen worse," Evelyn lied smoothly. She didn't have a medical kit. She didn't have a tourniquet. But she had leverage, and she had weight. Evelyn bunched up the heavy, torn silk of her ruined wedding skirt and shoved it directly into the gaping wound. Uncle Thomas screamed, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She locked her arms straight, pressing her palms into the makeshift bandage. But it wasn't enough. The pressure of the blood flow was too strong. Without hesitating, Evelyn shifted her body. She positioned her broad, heavy knee directly over her hands, throwing every ounce of her 250-pound frame into pressing down on the artery. "Men like Vincent choose women like you for comfort," Beatrice's cruel voice echoed in her mind. Evelyn bared her teeth. A delicate, size 2 socialite like Genevieve Pendleton or Savannah would not have the mass, the upper body strength, or the sheer gravitational weight required to stop a femoral bleed. Evelyn's body, the very body that had been mocked, scrutinized, and shamed for 30 years, was right now a powerful, immovable anchor, keeping her uncle anchored to the living world. "Press hard, kid," Uncle Thomas gasped, his eyes rolling back. "I'm not going anywhere," Evelyn growled, her knee locked, her weight bearing down like a mountain. Across the aisle, the shootout was reaching a stalemate. Vincent was taking out Gallagher's men one by one with terrifying accuracy, his revolver barking over the chaos. Leo and the capos had flanked the left side. But then, Declan Gallagher did something that made Evelyn's blood run cold. He didn't yell at his men. He yelled at the terrified blue bloods cowering in the pews. "Tell your security detail to do their bloody jobs, Arthur," Declan roared, ducking behind a stone font. "You promised me the doors would be clear. You promised me a clean shot at the altar." The gunfire momentarily faltered. The silence that followed was heavier than the bullets. Evelyn looked over at the left pews. Arthur Pendleton, Genevieve's father, the pillar of high society, the man who had looked down his nose at Evelyn just minutes ago, was pale and sweating. The hit was an inside job. Arthur Pendleton had sold out the King of New York to the Irish mob, hoping to eliminate Vincent and likely seize the power vacuum for his own corporate interests. Vincent stepped out from behind the altar. The bullets whizzing past him seemed entirely irrelevant. The betrayal radiating from Arthur was the only thing he focused on. "You brought a war into my church, Arthur," Vincent whispered, his voice somehow slicing through the din of the cathedral. In that moment of distraction, Declan Gallagher broke from his cover. He charged down the center aisle, an automatic pistol raised, aiming directly at Vincent's exposed back. "Vincent, behind you!" Evelyn screamed. Vincent spun, but a fraction of a second too late. Declan fired. The bullet tore through Vincent's bespoke tuxedo, grazing his ribs in a spray of crimson. He staggered and dropped to one knee, his heavy revolver clattering across the polished marble floor. "The king is dead," Declan sneered, stepping forward with his weapon raised to finish the job. He never saw the bride coming. Evelyn had just managed to slow Uncle Thomas's arterial bleed. Seeing the man she loved forced to his knees ignited a fierce, protective rage inside her. She didn't look around for a weapon. She was the weapon. Launching herself from behind the thick marble pillar, Evelyn threw her entire 250-pound frame directly at the Irish mob boss. A petite, size 2 socialite would have bounced harmlessly off Declan's tactical vest. Evelyn hit him like a runaway freight train. The impact was devastating. Declan's breath left him in a violent, wet wheeze as Evelyn's sheer momentum drove them both backward. They slammed brutally into a heavy oak pew, splintering the ancient wood beneath their combined weight. Declan's gun flew from his grip, skittering harmlessly into the shadows. Evelyn didn't stop. She pinned him against the wreckage, her heavy forearm pressing relentlessly into his throat to cut off his air supply. "You don't get to touch my husband," she hissed, her eyes wild, her ivory silk gown soaked in her uncle's blood. Her weight and leverage rendered the hardened mobster entirely immobile. A shadow fell over them. Vincent stood there, clutching his bleeding side, but holding Declan's dropped pistol with a steady hand. He looked at his bride with absolute, worshipful awe. "Step back, Mia Regina," Vincent murmured. Evelyn released her grip and stepped aside, her chest heaving. Vincent didn't hesitate. "Class dismissed, Gallagher," he said coldly, and pulled the trigger. With their leader dead, the remaining mercenaries instantly surrendered. Leo and the capos swarmed the aisles, zip-tying wrists and securing the perimeter. Evelyn was instantly back at Vincent's side, tearing a clean strip of silk from her ruined dress. "Let me see," she ordered, her trauma nurse instincts completely taking over. She inspected the bloody graze with deft hands. It's superficial, but you'll need stitches and antibiotics. Vincent caught her bloody hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I'm fine. He looked at her, her designer dress destroyed, covered in dirt and blood, and saw absolute perfection. We have one piece of trash left to take out, Vincent said, turning his cold gaze toward the cowering blue bloods on the left side of the aisle. Arthur Pendleton was frantically crawling toward the shattered vestibule doors, abandoning his daughter Genevieve in the pews. Leo effortlessly hoisted the billionaire by his collar, dragging him to the altar and tossing him at Vincent and Evelyn's feet. "Vincent, please!" Arthur begged, his hands trembling violently. "Gallagher threatened me. I had no choice. I swear it." Vincent remained silent. He simply looked at Evelyn, yielding the floor entirely to his queen. Evelyn stepped forward, the heavy thud of her heels echoing in the quieted church. She looked down at Arthur, then swept her gaze over the terrified society elite. Savannah, Beatrice, Genevieve, the very people who had mocked her size and laughed at her dress, were now staring at her in absolute terror. She had just overpowered a mob boss and saved the most dangerous man in New York. "My mother told me this morning that I was too big, too unrefined to sit in this world," Evelyn said, her voice clear, commanding, and ringing off the vaulted ceilings. She leaned over the cowering billionaire. "But from where I'm standing, Arthur, you all look incredibly small." Arthur whimpered, pressing his face to the floor. Evelyn straightened her spine and locked eyes with Leo. "Get this garbage out of my church. If I see his face in this city again, you have my permission to bury him under it." "Yes, ma'am," Leo grinned, a terrifying, scarred smile, as he dragged the sobbing man away. Vincent wrapped his arm around Evelyn's thick waist, pulling her close. "You are terrifying," he smirked. "You married a trauma nurse, Vincent?" Evelyn smiled back, exhaustion finally touching her features. "We don't panic." Vincent turned to the trembling priest, who had slowly emerged from behind a pillar, clutching his Bible like a shield. "Father," Vincent commanded, "we have a wedding to finish." There was no organ music. The air smelled of cordite, dust and blood. Evelyn stood tall in her torn, size 22 gown, her broad shoulders pulled back, completely unashamed. "Do you, Vincent Moretti, take Evelyn to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the priest stammered. "I do," Vincent said, his dark eyes burning into hers. "With my life." "And do you, Evelyn, take Vincent?" "I do," Evelyn said firmly. "I pronounce you husband and wife." Vincent pulled her in and kissed her with a fierce, possessive passion. The remaining guests looked on, no longer with disgust, but with pure, unadulterated respect. The King of New York had found his queen, and the entire city now knew. You do not mock the woman who wears the crown. If you loved this story of Evelyn, proving that true power comes in all shapes and sizes, hit that like button right now. Evelyn showed high society and the underworld that being a curvy bride isn't a weakness, it's a force of nature. Want more thrilling, drama-filled mafia romances where the underdog fiercely comes out on top? Don't forget to share this video with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more epic real-life stories. See you in the next one.